Are you a Christian nationalist? How do you answer that question? What should we think about Christian nationalism? Well, this is part 2 of our discussion of Christian nationalism on this slice of fresh bread. Welcome to Fresh Bread, a ministry of Grace Bible Church, Gainesville, with Pastor Brandon and Pastor Keith. Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to Fresh Bread, podcast number 18. Fresh Bread, where we're bringing the truth of God's Word to a starving world. And today we continue our discussion on Christian nationalism. It's so thick and so big, we're going to need 2 broadcasts. Just to talk about the United States again, is the United States, has it ever been or is it a Christian nation?
I would have to say no, in the sense of it's not the church. So in that sense, no, I don't think it was created to be a Christian nation in that sense.
Yeah, I don't think Jesus Christ was ever recognized as the supreme authority over the United States. It was,
even though we would say yes, is that there is a biblical worldview there. You know, I think that we're just one nation among many nations that have existed, and God blesses certain nations in certain ways. You know, ultimately how we obey Him.
We were a young nation, never was perfect. We did things that maybe a little bit too fast. That doesn't mean that the entire what we've done is evil, is wicked.
I think what we have to recognize as Christians is that we live in a fallen world, and that it's never going to be perfect.
The Civil War, we talk about slavery. The Civil War was some people say that was our punishment for slavery because there was a lot of men died. The Civil War is what paid the price for the freedom.
Yeah, I think I haven't completely thought that through. I mean, you're bringing it up now, but I think you're right. I think that price was paid in blood. You know, that I think we're looking at it in many ways wrong. You know, we're seeing people are looking at slavery and how evil it was, and that the United States was an evil nation. But in reality, the United States, actually, there were people within the country who saw it as the evil that it was, and they were willing to go to war over it, and they were willing to fight to end it. Believe me, there's a lot of politics that go into that in terms of the motives and what, you know, of the men that were fighting those battles. You know, some were fighting for states' rights and saying it's all about states' rights. Some were saying it's about slavery. Ultimately, though, the blood was shed, and ultimately, like you say, I mean, it men fought over that, and because of the United States, that doesn't exist anymore, at least in the form, you know, the African slavery. It's interesting, people not wanting to stand for the flag, but if it weren't for the United States and God using the United States to eradicate that institution, would it still be here? Now, there's a lot of economics that go into that and sort of thing. But the point is that God used the United States to get rid of that evil, you know, at least in that form.
I think what happened is the Civil War was put into motion in 1776 when they didn't know how to deal with it. They didn't know what to do. They were going to try to curb it as best they could, but that put in motion, actually, that was the only way it was going to happen, was with the Civil War. And it came, and they knew it was coming, and it did come in 1861. So
absolutely. And yes, I mean, I think that, again, it depends on how you look at it, but I think you have to recognize the ultimate good, that if it weren't for the men who fought against it, and, you know, that ultimately the nation that we are today is founded on the principles of those who wrote the Constitution, those who are part of those founding charters, and those who then fought for the freedom during the Civil War. I mean, the United States that we are today is a product of those things. And other things as well. And we need to recognize that. And we need to recognize that, you know, the good that the United States has been.
Exactly. And it's interesting because here we are, you and I, Arkansas, Minnesota.
Yes.
And here we are.
That's right. I think what he's referring to is that I was part of the Confederacy.
No.
And he was part of the...
No, but it is interesting, you know, 100 and some years ago, we wouldn't have been as close as we are now.
That's right.
But you're right. We went through all that. And as a nation, you grow. I think, like you said it best, I think if you go by God's laws, you go by God's principles, God will bless you. Things will go well. Mm-hmm. And I think we can see how we've gone away from that and the direction we're heading now. That's why we're in so much trouble.
Absolutely. I mean, I think even going back to the slavery issue, again, I think we were ultimately fighting that out. that we're trying to understand, understand God's desire for mankind. And ultimately, they were men who stood and said, men and women, I shouldn't say just men, but men and women who stood and said that slavery is evil. And by the way, there were a lot of Christians that were a part of that, part of those battles. And so, unfortunately, there were Christians on both sides. But again, ultimately, the United States was used to eradicate that, just as Great Britain was used to eradicate the slave trade within the British colonies. That was, William Wilberforce was a part of that, and who was connected to John Newton, and that they had a relationship, and John Newton being a former slave trader, and God using a former slave trader to influence a man who then influenced the British Parliament to law slavery. I mean, that's how God used Great Britain in that sense. And we see similar storylines that played themselves out with the United States. So it's easy for us to stand in judgment against people who were living back then. It'd be one thing for us to stand in judgment, but it would be another thing. It is another thing altogether to have lived through that and to have fought through it in, considering the culture that they lived in.
And you would think that, okay, we're more advanced now. That was over 100 years ago, but yet we still have slavery today.
Yeah, we definitely have forms of slavery today. I mean, the sexual slavery trade is alive and well, underground. It's not legalized, but it's alive and well. There are other forms of slavery that exist, economic, enslavement that exists today. So absolutely, I think that future generations could stand in judgment over us. I mean, the fact that we have killed so many babies in the womb is something that we definitely would be judged for, by other generations.
Yeah, I think you've said it that, 100 years from now or 200 years from now, people will look back and maybe feel the same way that we do about slavery, that they look at people who supported abortion. Like, how in the world could that even be possible? Thing popped into my head. Has there ever been a nation that has been applied God's principles more than the United States? I was thinking of Rome. You mentioned Rome under Constantine. They became Christian, but another nation that has really lived by those principles.
Well, I mean, even Israel, you can't say, I mean, under David, would be the closest they would have ever come to obeying God's law. So even Israel, you would be hard pressed to say that their laws, if you will, reflected God's law to the extent that the United States has done so. And I think that, when you look at it, I mean, God has blessed this nation in many ways.
And again, it's never been perfect, right?
No,
far from that.
Far from it. But I mean, it can't, right? I mean, because we're talking about fallen man who is governing himself. And so I think it's without a doubt the best that there has been, in terms of, you look at monarchies, you look at dictatorships, even in the world today, and in terms of governments, the United States has far exceeded most nations, if not all the nations. And so, in terms of the way we govern ourselves, and I think we should see that. And I think that these people who tear it down are doing so, out of ignorance, for sure. I mean, at least out of ignorance, and maybe some out of scorn. And I think they're looking at it in a wrong way.
When you think about what happened during the Revolutionary War, I think for us, we forget that we've never had a king or a queen. But when the United States was formed, every nation had kings, and the United States decided to form a nation of the people who would run the government, and that was so new and so different, and it worked for a while, but now it's kind of fizzing out a little bit. But
it's because we've slid, and it says in Judges, it speaks this of Israel, but it says everyone did what is right in their own eyes. That's Judges 21:25. I think it says it in another place as well. There was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And so that's ultimately what's happening in the United States, is that we've gone away from, or we're sliding away from God as being, in terms of our laws, reflecting God's law. We're moving away from that, and we're losing any blessing that we had in obedience. We're losing that, and I think God is removing His hand of blessing, and ultimately it's His wrath that we're going to begin to see if we haven't already begun to see it.
Yeah, I think when you start seeing a holiday like Thanksgiving becoming people considering that evil, I think we've moved pretty far away from where we were.
Yeah, I think for sure. I mean, there's definitely, this is not the same nation that I grew up in.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
we're sliding fast.
sadly sliding fast. But I think that's going back to the Christian nationalism. Again, it's a clash of worldviews, and there's a worldview that says that God is right and that God's law is right and good, and that our laws should reflect His law. And there's a worldview that says that no, we're gonna shake our fist at God, and He doesn't exist. Although I don't think there is anything as a true atheist. I think everyone is just a suppression of the truth and unrighteousness. But at the end of the day, they shake their fist at God and say that we're not going to do it His way. And so I think that's where we are as a nation.
Can I ask you the question? What is the difference between patriotism and nationalism?
Yeah. Well, again, I think that it depends on, if you're looking at nationalism in a bad light, idolatrous idea, that we're, nationalism, it's all about the nation, and, the nation is always right, that looking at it that way, I think that is a wrong way of looking at it. But patriotism, I think celebrating a nation and celebrating the fact that we're part of a nation that we can be a part of, that we can enjoy, that we're protected by, I think that's what, patriotism is. We stand generally against evil, quote unquote, proud to be part of this nation. I don't think that's wrong. I don't think that that's wrong to have a national, national pride that says, that we're part of a nation who, that upholds freedom, that people can flourish, and we want people to flourish. That's, I can live next to my neighbor in peace, and I can celebrate that because we are a nation of laws, and those laws generally reflect God's character. And I think that's a good thing. I mean, I'm a patriot in that sense.
So is there a danger, though, of Christian nationalism elevating the nation ahead of Christ? Could that be a danger?
Well, I think it is a danger, and I think that's part of what we're seeing. When you go to a church and they talk more about politics than they do about Christ. They talk more about the Constitution than they do about the Bible. I think that's problematic. There is an issue there. Again, I think we need to be cognizant of the danger of elevating the nation above Christ. I think Moeller said it well, that, again, we are part of this nation, and we need to, it's one thing to celebrate that and be a patriot and be thankful that God has placed us in this nation. But what we have to recognize is that we're above all citizens of another kingdom as Christians. Right, that we have another king, and that king is Jesus, and we never want to elevate this nation above that kingdom, the kingdom that we're now citizens of. And we're in this world, but we're not of this world. And I'm very thankful to live in a country like the United States that still to this day I'm allowed to preach and teach, and I'm allowed to have a podcast where I can state my opinion, and I'm allowed to do these things without worry of being thrown in jail. I'm thankful to be a part of a country like that, but it's not above and beyond. It isn't the end all be all. I mean, if it changes tomorrow and you and I get thrown in jail for doing this podcast, that's okay. I'm just fine with that, because this is not my ultimate citizenship. My ultimate citizenship is not as an American. My ultimate citizenship is in heaven.
So you kind of answered the question about, should Christians be patriotic? You are patriotic. I'm patriotic.
I celebrate the 4th of July with the best of them. I love fireworks. I love the flag. I'm thankful my son is a Marine. I'm thankful that he's serving his country in that way. Again, do I believe everything the United States has done and is doing is right? Absolutely not. But I do still believe that it's a country that I can be thankful to live in, and therefore I can be patriotic and should be patriotic.
Does the Bible have anything to say about nationalism?
Well, I think what we have to recognize is God has made the nations. And so he appoints what nation you're going to be a part of. And, he makes you a part of that nation. I mean, if you think Genesis chapter 10, is the table of nations, and in Genesis 11 is the Tower of Babel. Well, what happened at the Tower of Babel? Tower of Babel, God confused the language and he spread out the people over the face of the earth. That is where we get nations, and God has created those nations. And so in terms of nationalism, in terms of if I'm looking at it from a negative point of view and I'm making the nation greater than God, if I'm making the nation my God, like the nation has now become my God, that is not right?
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm seeing it as I'm part of a nation, I mean, God even says there'll be in Revelation 5 says that there'll be every tribe, tongue, and nation before the throne of God. I mean, so God is going to get the glory in that all the nations will be represented before the throne. So ultimately, nations are God's ideas. I mean, nations are God's idea. And so I need to recognize that. That's, again, Acts 17, what we just said earlier. God has appointed the nations. He's appointed the times. He's appointed the boundaries, and recognizing that. And he placed me as a believer here in the United States, and I'm part of a nation. Now, whether I'll be an American before the throne or whether, I'll be seen in a different light. I don't, in terms of what nation I'm part of, I don't know, because I don't know how God is going to look at that. My family at some point probably came from Ireland or, in England, and, so how God, and we're all blended, and how he looks at that, in terms of the nations. I just know that he's going to recognize the nations before his throne.
That people who are against Christian nationalism say we shouldn't be Christian nationalists is because in heaven it will feature people from every tribe and every nation worshiping together. So it's got to be wrong to have that down here. That's what they would say, that's different in heaven.
Well, because we're unified, we have unity in Christ in heaven. And I mean, that's the beauty of it, is that that God's economy, I can stand together with every other nation because I'm in Christ. That's how God has made it. That's actually why we're going to be worshiping, right? Because we're standing unified before the throne, and he gets all the glory. And it's from every tribe, tongue, and nation. And so he's redeemed, people from every tribe, tongue, and nation. And so he gets all the glory. But here on earth, in a sin-fallen world, we can't just have unity for unity's sake. That's actually satanic. That's actually what the devil is trying to do.
Right.
Is he's trying to forge a counterfeit. He's trying to bring unity to the world, but he's trying to do it for his glory. And ultimately that is not going to work. And so here I need to recognize that there are different nations, and that God is dealing differently in how he's dealing with each nation. And it's, each nation is his idea, and, he's dealing differently with them. And I need to recognize that.
There are borders for a reason.
That's right.
I like how you said it, and it made me think about it because when we were doing the eschatology, when you said that God is allowing man to trying to run things, and it's always been a disaster. From the world wars, and Jesus said there'll be wars, rumors of wars and famines, just so much corruption in governments, and just looking around the world, and it just doesn't seem right. But I like how you said that God is showing that, and then when Christ comes and sets up his kingdom, it's gonna work. It's gonna be the way it was meant to be.
It's man trying to do it his own way. That's what the ultimate problem is.
The Bible commands Christians to submit to government, and this is a question that's been asked over and over, but what if government restrictions interfere with worship?
Well, I think, obviously we had to answer that question in 2020, and, some of us got the answer wrong, and some of us got it wrong for a short amount of time, and others got it wrong for a longer time. And, ultimately, I think the lesson that was learned in 2020 probably, been a lesson that we should have learned a long time ago, but ultimately that the government shouldn't dictate, what happens in the church. That we need to, when the government says that you can't worship, here's what's interesting, even if they did it for the right motives, I think what we have to be cognizant of is that evil governments made up of evil men, are going to take advantage. they're going to take advantage of things that they're allowed. And so if you give them an inch, they're going to take a mile. And that's, I think, what we saw in 2020. We gave them an inch. We said, okay, let's see how bad this thing is. Let's flatten the curve. So we did our part. But then when it was time to say, okay, let's loosen it back up, let us go back to church, the answer was no, at least in some places. Thankfully not here in Florida. But, there was, even here in Florida, there was confusion. I remember making the decision, unfortunately, we stopped gathering for a month or so. And I remember it being a very difficult decision for us to decide to go back. And, because it was confusing as to what was being allowed and not being allowed. But I think looking back on it, we made the wrong decision. I mean, we made the right decision in gathering again, but we made the wrong decision in giving the government that incursion into the church.
Yes, and I had a hard time understanding why 6 feet is better than 7 feet. I didn't understand that. But so you think that'll ever happen again? Do you think that the church will ever get to a point and say, yeah, okay, we'll stop? Or you think that was a one-time thing?
Yeah, I think, it's interesting. Some churches didn't stop. They didn't.
They never did.
They never stopped.
Wow.
Well, I mean, like Chris LeDuc in California, I don't
stop?
think he ever stopped.
Even Grace did, though.
Yeah, Grace Community did.
For maybe 2 weeks?
That longer than that.
Was it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, MacArthur, they started just kind of trickling back in with
he
them.
preached in the sanctuary, but
yeah. And then people began to come back in, as time went on. I wasn't there, but that's what, I heard, him say and what happened. But, we actually had more of an official, it was Easter, right after Easter, that we gathered again, that we started gathering. And
but
so
you guys were renting a building, so that's harder too.
Yeah, it was hard because we had to negotiate with the people, but they actually allowed us to start again, but it wasn't, at the beginning we were told we had to stop gathering, that because that was going to be that was the rule. So we didn't have as much of a choice unless we wanted to gather, at a house or whatever, which we were too big at the time to be able to do that. So we did stop, but we started again later. But it was a difficult decision.
Say there's another virus, monkeypox 3 is out, and you got to stop the churches. I don't think.
No, I don't. I think there will be some that would. Yeah, I mean, because they've shown that they weren't against it, right? I mean, but I think that by and large, churches that are trying to live according to what Scripture says, I think they're going to stand against that. Yeah. I know we would. Our stand right now, and I don't think under our leadership, under you and I, Keith and Brandon, I don't think that would change. I don't see a scenario where we would capitulate to the government in that way, in terms of stopping and gathering. But yeah, I think there would be other churches that would, and I do think that something's coming. I don't know what it is. I don't think 2020 is the last time it's going to happen. I'm probably going to sound like a conspiracy theorist here, but I don't think that was a mistake. I think that there was something behind all that, and I think it was a dress rehearsal for whatever the future holds. Yeah. But call me a conspiracy theorist, but that's what I think.
You're a conspiracy theorist. No, you're not. I agree with you, because that was so confusing. I'm being in California when they closed the churches, but yet Walmart was open, strip clubs were open, and liquor stores were open. I'm like, what is going on? And then you had these funerals. I think it was it George Floyd's funeral, where they had 10,000 people, but then a family of 20 people couldn't gather. And it was so crazy. It was just so weird. They just kept moving, like you talk about football, they kept moving the goalpost. Here it's here one day, and then it's there the next day. And so it was so confusing. And I think that kind of led to the churches like...
Do you remember the phases? I don't know about California, but they had here in Florida that we went, we had like...
Phase 1.
Phase 1, phase... I think there was phases, but...
We might have had phases too, but I don't remember.
Yeah, but you get to a certain phase or level, and churches could meet, and you get to another level, and these things could start happening again. Sports events or whatever. And I mean, it's just crazy. It was definitely an incursion into American life, and especially into the church, and even into the family as well. But it was the government really using an emergency that ultimately wasn't an emergency to gain power.
Well, hopefully we sketched this out for you, Christian nationalism.
Yeah, I think that where we need to go now is really to dig into some of these aspects, maybe explore some of these things in a deeper way.
Yeah, I agree. I think, and we'll do that probably end of summer maybe.
Yeah.
Or so, because we want you to listen to this, digest it. If you maybe some of you have never heard this before, maybe some of you are well aware of it. I've heard of it, but I didn't really look into it. And I was going to ask you this question: is it the same as white nationalism, Christian nationalism? It just sounds negative.
Well, the problem is that that's why. I mean, that's what's happening, is that we're being broad brushed. So yes, in the minds of the secular media and those who follow the secular media, the whole intersectionality and social justice, this is what it's morphed into. And so yes, they are seeing us as white Christian nationalists. And yes, it is a negative connotation. So, I will say, I'm guilty as charged. And I said, if you are saying this, yes, that's what I am. But I think that we need to be careful, because we need to understand that when they say that we're Christian nationalists, there is a negative connotation. And this is the negative connotation, that it's racist, it's xenophobic, all the above when it comes to the things that we see with intersectionality and social justice.
We started the broadcast with the question: how should you answer the question, are you a Christian nationalist? And the answer is, it depends.
It depends. But I will say, it's interesting, just as a kind of tag on and to end this, in James, the issue there in the book of James, in the letter that James wrote, the issue was how Christians were ultimately handling each other. So you had those who were rich and had means, and you had those who were poor. I see in James, I see rich Christians and I see poor Christians. And then I see the rich that are outside of the church. We have the same thing that's boiling and simmering here with nationalism, is you have the secular media in the secular world who's pointing at Christians, and they're saying, white nationalist. They're saying, you guys are bad. January 6th, insurrectionists. This is problematic. You're bad. Within our camp, the Christian camp, you have those who are, you have a separation. You have those who are saying that, hey, Christian nationalism, that it's a bad thing. And then you have those who are saying, no, it's not a bad thing. Okay. And so what's happening is that the world is using us against each other. As Christians, we better be able to define what we believe and understand what we believe, because that's the avenue that the world is using to get into the church, is by pitting us against each other. And so we better start really thinking through this, because that's where persecution comes from. Ultimately, who's going to be left holding the bag is those who believe the truth. That's what's ultimately going to happen.
Okay. That's a good way to end it.
Why don't we end it?
Let's do it. I was trying to think of something piffy to say, but I can't. So let's end it.
Hit the music.
You've been listening to Fresh Bread, a ministry of Grace Bible Church, Gainesville. For more information, go to gracegainesville.org. And thanks for listening.